Can I carry her?
Yes, please.
The cabin lights dimmed as Flight 447 prepared for takeoff, but Debra Nicholson's nightmare was just beginning. Eva's wails pierced through the hum of the engines, and despite rocking, shushing, and every trick in her maternal playbook, nothing worked. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Eyes judged. Whispers stung. Then there was him, the man in 3A with the tailored navy blazer and the kind of composed expression that screamed money and control. Eric Smith hadn't so much as glanced her way during boarding, his attention fixed on the financial reports glowing on his tablet. Debra braced herself for the inevitable sigh of annoyance, the passive-aggressive headphone adjustment, maybe even a complaint to the flight attendant. But when Eric finally turned toward her, something unexpected flickered in his steel blue eyes. Not irritation, not judgment. Recognition, perhaps. Or was it empathy? "May I?" he asked quietly, extending his hands toward Eva. Debra froze. Strangers didn't volunteer to hold screaming babies, especially not billionaires in first class. Yet something about his gentle tone, the genuine concern softening his angular features, made her hesitate just long enough to wonder what could possibly happen at 30,000 feet that would change everything. Eva had stopped crying. That alone felt like a miracle. Debra watched in quiet disbelief as the billionaire Eric, he'd said his name was Eric, held her daughter with the kind of natural ease that most strangers never achieved. His large hands cradled Eva's small body gently, supporting her head, rocking her with a subtle rhythm that seemed instinctive rather than practiced. Eva's tear-stained cheeks were already drying, her tiny fingers wrapped around Eric's thumb as she gazed up at him with curious, exhausted eyes. "You're good at this," Debra said, her voice still tight with the residual stress of the past hour. She couldn't quite bring herself to fully relax, even though her arms ached from the relief of not having to hold her squirming, screaming daughter. Eric's smile was slight, almost sad. "I had some practice once." He didn't elaborate, and something in his tone suggested she shouldn't ask. The shadows that passed across his face told her enough this man understood loss. The flight attendant passed by, her earlier disapproving expression now replaced with something like approval. Debra felt a flush of shame and gratitude warring in her chest. She shouldn't need a well-dressed white man to validate her existence on this plane. Yet here she was, relieved that his presence had shifted the entire cabin's energy toward them. "So," Eric said quietly, his attention still on Eva, "Seattle. Home or new beginning?" Debra hesitated. The truth was too raw, too complicated for a stranger on a plane. "New beginning," she said finally. "A very necessary one." He nodded, understanding more than she'd said. "I'm heading home, actually, though it doesn't feel much like one anymore." He glanced out the window at the clouds stretching endlessly below them. "Just came from San Francisco. A negotiation that didn't go the way I'd hoped." "What do you do?" Debra asked, though she could already guess. Everything about him screamed success. The tailored blazer, the expensive watch, the quiet confidence that came from never having to prove yourself. "Tech, mostly. Investments. Boring stuff." He waved it away like it meant nothing, but Debra knew that kind of dismissal only came from people for whom money had ceased to be a concern. "These days I'm trying to focus more on foundation work. Children's causes, family support services." Something in her chest tightened. Of course he was philanthropic. Of course he had causes. People like him always did, writing checks to ease whatever guilt their wealth created, feeling good about themselves while people like her struggled to keep the lights on. But then Eva cooed softly, and Eric's entire face transformed. The businessman disappeared, replaced by something achingly human. He smiled down at her daughter with such genuine warmth that Debra felt her cynicism waver. "What about you?" he asked. "What are you hoping to find in Seattle?" "Work. Stability. A place where nobody knows my name." The last part slipped out before she could stop it, revealing more than she'd intended. Eric's eyes met hers then, and she saw recognition there. Not pity, she couldn't have tolerated pity, but understanding. Running from something or towards something. "Both, I guess. The best kind of fresh start," he said softly. They fell into an easy silence after that, the kind that didn't demand filling. Eric continued holding Eva, who had now fully surrendered to sleep in his arms, her rosebud mouth slightly open, her breath evening out into the peaceful rhythm of infant dreams. Debra found herself studying him, the sharp line of his jaw, the slight silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, the way his shoulders seemed to carry weight she couldn't see. The plane shuddered. At first, it was just a small bump, the kind that happened on every flight. But then it hit again, harder, and the seatbelt sign dinged on with an urgent chime. The pilot's voice crackled through the speakers, professional but tight. "Folks, we're hitting some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The plane dropped. Debra's stomach lurched as they fell through an air pocket, overhead bins rattling, oxygen masks swaying but not yet deploying. Screams erupted from other passengers. Her hands flew out instinctively, one reaching for the armrest, the other toward Eva. But Eric had already moved. He'd tucked Eva against his chest with one arm, the other bracing against the seat in front of them, his body curved protectively over her daughter like a shield. When the plane bucked again, violently enough that Debra's head nearly hit the window, Eric's free hand shot out and caught her shoulder, holding her steady. "I've got her," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "I've got you both." The turbulence continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Vicious jolts that sent bags tumbling from overhead compartments, drinks spilling, passengers crying and praying. Through it all, Eric held Eva with unwavering steadiness, his body absorbing the shocks, his presence somehow making Debra feel safer than she had in months. When it finally stopped, when the plane leveled out and the pilot announced they were through the worst of it, Debra realized she was shaking. Eric was still holding her daughter, still protecting a child who wasn't his, a woman he didn't know. "Thank you," she whispered, and meant it more deeply than those two words could express. Eric carefully transferred Eva back to her arms. The baby stirred slightly but didn't wake, exhausted from her earlier crying and lulled by sleep. "She's beautiful," he said quietly. "You're doing a good job." Debra felt tears prick her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time someone had said that to her. "Most days I'm not sure I am. The fact that you worry about it means you are." They didn't talk much for the rest of the flight. But something had shifted between them, some unspoken understanding forged in crisis and unexpected kindness. When the plane finally touched down in Seattle, when they shuffled through the aisle toward the exit, Debra felt an odd reluctance to say goodbye to this stranger who'd somehow made her feel less alone. At baggage claim, amid the chaos of travelers reuniting and searching for luggage, Eric turned to her. "I hope you find what you're looking for here," he said. "Both of you." "You too," Debra replied, shifting Eva's weight on her hip. "I hope your next negotiation goes better." He smiled that sad smile again. "Some things can't be negotiated." They parted then, Eric disappearing into the crowd with just a brief backward glance. Debra collected her two battered suitcases, everything she owned in the world, and headed for the taxi stand, already calculating how many days she could afford a motel before her money ran out completely. It wasn't until 3 days later, when she was down to her last $40 and facing an eviction notice from the weekly motel that smelled of cigarettes and desperation, that she found the business card. It had slipped into the side pocket of Eva's diaper bag, tucked so carefully she almost missed it. Eric Smith, CEO, Smith Ventures, and the Eva Foundation. Debra stared at the name of the foundation, her breath catching. Eva. He'd named it Eva. Or the foundation had already been named Eva, and that's why he'd connected so instantly with her daughter. Either way, the coincidence felt too large to ignore. On the back, in precise handwriting, "If you need anything." I mean it. E. Her hands trembled as she held the card. Pride warred with desperation, independence with the crying baby on the motel bed, and the eviction notice on the sagging nightstand. She'd sworn she'd never rely on a man again, never put herself in a position where someone else held power over her survival. But this wasn't about her anymore. It was about Eva, about giving her daughter a chance at something better than running and hiding and counting pennies in cheap motels. Debra pulled out her phone, stared at the number on the card for a long minute, then dialed before she could talk herself out of it. He answered on the second ring. "Eric Smith." "It's Debra," she said, her voice barely steady. "From the flight. I need help. I need a job. Anything. I'm good with numbers. I can clean. I can organize." "Debra." His voice was warm, relieved even. "I'm glad you called. How soon can you come to my office?" She looked around the dismal motel room, at Eva reaching for her with tiny hands, at the life she was trying so hard to build from nothing. "Tomorrow. Tomorrow's perfect. I think I have something that might be exactly what you're looking for." As she hung up, Debra couldn't shake the feeling that she was either making the best decision of her life or walking straight into another disaster. She'd learned the hard way that men who seemed too good to be true usually were. But Eva deserved a chance. And maybe, just maybe, so did she. The Smith Ventures building pierced the Seattle skyline like a glass monument to ambition. Debra stood on the sidewalk outside, Eva strapped to her chest in a worn carrier, and stared up at the 37 floors of polished steel and tinted windows. Her reflection stared back at her from the lobby doors, a tired black woman in her best thrift store blouse, carrying everything she owned in a diaper bag, about to enter a world where she didn't belong. She almost turned around. But Eva made a small sound, and Debra remembered the eviction notice, the dwindling cash, the way her daughter's formula was already running low. She pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby was all marble and modern art, the kind of space designed to make you feel small. A security guard looked up from his desk, his expression already forming that familiar mix of suspicion and dismissal that Debra had learned to recognize. She straightened her spine. "I have an appointment with Eric Smith." The guard's eyebrows rose. He checked his computer, then checked again, like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Ms. Nicholson." "That's right. 23rd floor. The Eva Foundation." He handed her a visitor's badge, his demeanor shifting to something more respectful. "The elevators are to your left." The foundation occupied the entire 23rd floor, but it couldn't have been more different from the corporate sterility below. The walls were painted in warm colors, soft yellows and gentle blues. Children's artwork hung in frames beside professional photographs of smiling families. A play area occupied one corner, filled with toys and books. The reception area felt more like a community center than a billionaire's charitable tax write-off. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver-streaked locks approached. "You must be Debra. I'm Patricia, the foundation director. Eric's in his office. He's been waiting for you." She smiled at Eva. "And who's this beautiful girl?" "This is Eva." Something flickered across Patricia's face. Recognition, sadness, understanding. "What a lovely name," she said softly. "Come on back." Eric's office was smaller than Debra expected, more personal. Instead of the massive desk and leather furniture she'd imagined, there was a simple wooden desk covered in files and photos. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the sound, the water gray and restless under cloudy skies. But what caught her attention was the photograph on the credenza, a younger Eric with his arm around a pregnant woman with auburn hair and a radiant smile. "That's Melissa." Eric's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him in the doorway, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of the business attire she'd expected. He looked at the photograph with an expression that was practiced in its composure, like he'd learned to control the pain. "My wife. That was taken about 2 weeks before she went into labor." Debra's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. 5 years ago next month." He moved to his desk, gestured for her to sit. She had complications during delivery. They both had happened very fast. The name of the foundation suddenly made terrible sense. "You named it after your daughter." "After what I lost, yes. And what I wanted to help others keep." Eric sat across from her, his attention shifting to Eva, who was gazing around the room with wide, curious eyes. "When I saw you on that plane, when I held Eva and she stopped crying, it was the first time in 5 years I'd held a baby. The first time I'd let myself." Debra felt a cold wariness settle over her heart. She understood grief, understood loss, but she also understood how dangerous it could be when someone tried to fill a void with people who weren't meant to fill it. "Mr. Smith." "Eric, please." "Eric, I appreciate what you're offering, but I need to understand what this job actually is. Because if you're looking for some kind of replacement, or therapy, or—" "I'm not." His voice was firm, but not defensive. "I won't lie to you, Debra. Seeing you with Eva stirred something in me that I've kept locked away for a long time. But this job is real. The foundation needs someone to help coordinate our family services program, working directly with single mothers, connecting them with resources, managing our emergency assistance fund. Patricia's been handling it alone, and she's overwhelmed. I don't have experience with that kind of work. You have the experience that matters. You know what it's like to need help and be too proud or too scared to ask for it. You know how to navigate systems designed to make you fail. You know what these mothers need because you are these mothers." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I'm not offering you charity, Debra. I'm offering you a job. One that pays $45,000 a year with benefits, including childcare. Eva can stay in our nursery downstairs while you work. The number hit her like a physical blow. 45,000. More money than she'd ever made in her life. Benefits. Childcare. It was too much, too good, too. What's the catch? She asked. Eric smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. The catch is that I'm a complicated person offering you something that might seem too good to be true because I've learned that money can't buy back what I lost, but it can prevent others from losing what they have. The catch is that I'm selfish enough to want to be around you and Eva because you remind me that life continues even after tragedy. The catch is that I'm asking you to trust someone you barely know. Debra looked down at Eva, who had grabbed a fistful of her blouse and was trying to eat it. 45,000 a year. A real chance. But also a billionaire with ghosts he wanted to exorcise, and Debra had already played that role once before, being the thing that was supposed to fix a broken man. It never ended well. I need to think about it, she said. Of course. Take the rest of the day. Patricia can show you around, introduce you to the team. No pressure. But there was pressure. There was always pressure when you were down to your last $40 and your baby needed formula. Patricia's tour revealed a foundation that was genuinely making a difference. A legal clinic helping mothers escape abusive relationships, a job training program, an emergency fund that had prevented dozens of evictions. The staff was small but passionate, and they talked about Eric with a respect that seemed earned rather than obligatory. He's not perfect, Patricia said quietly as they watched Eric through his office window, now on a phone call, his expression intense. He works too much, keeps people at a distance, struggles with letting anyone really in. But he's honest. What you see is what you get. And this foundation, it's not some vanity project. It's his penance and his purpose all wrapped into one. Debra accepted the job that afternoon, despite her reservations, despite the voice in her head that screamed warnings. She accepted it because Eva needed stability and because some part of her wanted to believe that not every hand extended and help came with strings attached. The first 2 weeks were careful and professional. Debra threw herself into the work, discovering that she had a natural talent for connecting with the mothers who came through their doors. She understood their fear, their pride, their desperation. She knew how to listen without judging, how to offer help without making them feel small. Eric kept his distance, mostly. He was respectful, professional, always asking about Eva but never overstepping. But there were moments, small moments that accumulated like drops of water wearing away stone. The afternoon she found him on the floor of the nursery, making silly faces at Eva until her daughter's belly laugh filled the room. Debra had frozen in the doorway, watching this powerful man completely undo himself for a baby's smile, and felt something dangerous shift in her chest. The evening they both stayed late finishing grant applications, and Eric ordered Thai food, and they ate it sitting on his office floor while Eva slept in her carrier. He told her about Melissa, really told her, not just the tragedy but the love, the dreams they'd had, the way he'd lost himself when he lost them. I became someone I didn't recognize, he admitted, setting down his pad thai. Ruthless, cold. I built an empire because it was easier than feeling anything. The board loves that version of me. My COO, Richard, he actively encourages it. He thinks this, he gestured around the foundation office, is a distraction from what I should really be doing, which is making them all richer. What do you think you should be doing? Debra asked. Eric looked at her, then at Eva sleeping peacefully. I think I should be doing exactly this. Finally, the late-night conversation when Debra confessed her own story, Marcus, the abuse, the fear, the way she'd fled in the night with nothing but Eva and a bus ticket. Eric listened without trying to fix it, without offering solutions or platitudes. He just listened, and his quiet rage on her behalf was somehow more comforting than any words could have been. If he ever comes near you again, Eric said, his voice low and fierce, I will make sure he regrets it. I don't need you to fight my battles, Debra said, but her voice lacked conviction. I know you don't need me to. That doesn't mean I won't. It was dangerous, this growing closeness. Debra could feel herself leaning toward it even as every survival instinct screamed to pull back. Eric was kind, yes, but he was also damaged, and she'd learned that damaged men could be the most dangerous kind. Their need could swallow you whole. The complication arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of Richard Chun, Eric's COO, appearing at the foundation unannounced. He was younger than Debra expected, sharp-featured and sharper dressed, with the kind of aggressive energy that made every conversation feel like a negotiation. "Eric, we need to talk," Richard said, barely glancing at Debra. "The board is asking questions about your time allocation. You've missed 3 executive meetings in the past month. I sent delegates. The foundation needs. The foundation is not a $100 million merger that's currently at risk because our CEO is playing house." Richard's eyes flicked to Debra then, dismissive and knowing. "No offense, Richard." Eric's voice carried a warning that Debra had never heard before. "We'll discuss this in my office." Now, through the glass walls, Debra could see the argument unfold. Richard's aggressive gestures, Eric's controlled responses, the tension building until Richard finally threw his hands up and stalked toward the elevator. Eric emerged looking exhausted. "I'm sorry you had to witness that. Is it true? The board is questioning you." "The board questions everything I do that doesn't directly increase shareholder value. They've questioned this foundation since I started it. Having me actually present here, involved in day-to-day operations, makes them nervous." He ran a hand through his hair. "They think I'm losing focus, that I'm letting personal feelings interfere with business judgment." "Are you?" Debra asked quietly. Eric met her eyes, and the honesty in his gaze made her breath catch. "Yes, probably. But for the first time in 5 years, I don't care." That night, as Debra fed Eva in the small apartment the foundation had helped her secure, she couldn't stop thinking about the way Eric had looked at her. Like she was something precious. Like she mattered beyond what she could provide. It terrified her. Because the last time a man had looked at her like that, it had ended with bruises and escape plans and a baby born into chaos. But Eric wasn't Marcus. She knew that, intellectually. Eric was gentle and broken and trying to heal. The problem was that Debra wasn't sure she could tell the difference anymore between a man who wanted to help her and a man who wanted to consume her. Both could look like kindness from the outside. Eva finished her bottle and looked up at Debra with those wide, trusting eyes, eyes that said her mother would keep her safe, would make the right choices, would know the difference between salvation and another beautiful trap. Debra just hoped her daughter was right. Debra saw Marcus before he saw her. She was leaving the foundation with Eva on her hip, already planning the evening ahead, mac and cheese for dinner, maybe a walk to the park if the rain held off, when she spotted him across the street, leaning against a lamppost like he had every right to be there, wearing the leather jacket she'd once thought made him look dangerous in an exciting way. Now it just looked like a costume for the predator he'd always been. Their eyes met. He smiled. Every muscle in Debra's body went rigid. Eva sensed the tension immediately and started to fuss. Debra forced herself to move, to walk toward the bus stop with steady steps that betrayed none of the panic screaming through her veins. "Don't run. Don't show fear. Get to public space." But Marcus was already crossing the street. "Deb." His voice was warm, familiar, the same tone he'd used after the first time he'd shoved her into a wall, full of apology and false tenderness. "Baby, I've been looking everywhere for you. Don't." She kept walking, kept her voice low but firm. "Don't come near us." He fell into step beside her anyway, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the expensive kind he bought when he was between jobs, and she was working doubles to keep their lights on. "That's not very friendly. I just want to see my daughter." "You don't have a daughter. Courts might see it differently." His smile never wavered, but his voice dropped to that tone she remembered too well, the one that preceded violence. "You left Texas with my child, Debra. No custody agreement, no permission. Some people might call that kidnapping." Fear and fury warred in her chest. "You're not on her birth certificate. You have no legal claim. Yet. But I've got a lawyer now. Good one, too. Says I've got rights as the biological father. Says a judge might wonder why you ran off in the middle of the night. Might question your stability, your fitness as a mother." He moved closer, his hand reaching toward Eva. "Especially now that I see you're shacking up with some rich white guy, using my baby too. Get away from us." The voice came from behind them, cold and sharp as a blade. Eric stood 10 feet away, phone in hand, flanked by 2 men in dark suits who had the unmistakable bearing of professional security. How long had they been following her? How long had Eric been watching? Marcus's charming mask slipped for just a second, revealing something ugly underneath. Then it snapped back into place. "And you are someone who's been recording this entire conversation." Eric held up his phone, including the threats, the harassment, and the attempted unwanted contact with a minor. I'm talking to the mother of my child. You're stalking an employee of my foundation in violation of Washington state harassment laws. Eric stepped forward, and the security detail moved with him like shadows. I have lawyers who would be happy to explain the distinction to you, and to a judge, if necessary. Marcus looked between Eric and Debra, calculation visible in his eyes. She could see him weighing his options, trying to determine which approach would work. He settled on reasonable, aggrieved father. Look, I don't want trouble. I just want what's right for my daughter. Debra and I, we had our problems, but Eva deserves to know her father. Eva deserves to be safe, Debra said, finding her voice. That's all she deserves from you. Safety from you. That's a serious accusation, Marcus said, but she could see the worry creeping into his expression. Eric and his security detail represented something Marcus understood: power, money, resources he couldn't match. One of the security men handed Eric a document. Eric passed it to Marcus. Temporary restraining order. You're to stay at least 500 feet from Ms. Nicholson and her daughter at all times. Violation will result in immediate arrest. You can't. I can. I have. And if you contest it, I will personally ensure that every incident of abuse, every threat, every controlling behavior from your relationship with Ms. Nicholson is documented and presented to the court. Eric's voice never rose, but the steel in it was unmistakable. Do you understand? Marcus looked at the restraining order, then at Debra. The mask was gone now, replaced by pure hatred. This isn't over. Actually, Eric said quietly, it is. The security detail escorted Marcus to the corner and watched until he got into a beat-up Honda and drove away. Only then did Eric turn to Debra, his expression shifting from granite to concern. Are you okay? Is Eva? How long have you been having me followed? Debra's voice shook with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite anger, but lived somewhere dangerous between them. Eric had the grace to look uncomfortable. Since your second day at the foundation. Just a precaution. You mentioned your ex might. You had no right. She clutched Eva tighter. I didn't ask for bodyguards. I didn't ask for you to swoop in, and he was threatening you. I can handle my own problems. Debra. But she was already walking away, vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Behind her, she heard Eric start to follow, then stop. The security detail kept their distance but didn't disappear. Even in her fury, she understood they wouldn't, not now that Marcus had found her. The full weight of what had just happened hit her when she reached her apartment. Marcus knew where she worked. He'd found her despite her precautions, despite running halfway across the country. And Eric had been watching her, protecting her without permission, making decisions about her safety like she was something fragile that needed managing. It felt too familiar. The control masked as care. She fed Eva mechanically, going through the motions of their bedtime routine while her mind spun. The knock on her door an hour later wasn't a surprise. It's me, Eric called through the door. Just me. No security, no lawyers. Just me. Against her better judgment, Debra opened the door. Eric looked wrecked, hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. Still wearing the same clothes from earlier. I overstepped, he said immediately. The security detail, not telling you that was wrong. I was trying to protect you, but I didn't respect your autonomy in the process. You can't just make decisions for me, Eric. I know. He leaned against the doorframe, careful not to enter without invitation. I'm used to solving problems with resources and power. It's what I'm good at. But you're not a problem to be solved, and I had no right to treat you like one. Debra wanted to stay angry, but exhaustion was winning. He's not going to stop. That restraining order will just make him angrier. Probably. But now there's a legal record. Now you have documentation. And if he violates it, he goes to jail immediately, no questions asked. Eric's expression was earnest, almost pleading. I know you don't want to need help. I understand that. But sometimes accepting help isn't weakness, it's strategy. Before Debra could respond, her phone buzzed. Then again, and again, she pulled it out, frowning at the flood of notifications. Social media alerts, news apps, text messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Her stomach dropped as she opened the first link. Tech billionaire's mystery woman, Eric Smith's secret family. The photo was from that afternoon, Eric standing protectively near her and Eva, the security detail visible in the background. Someone had captured the whole confrontation and sold it to the tabloids. The article was pure speculation, calling her Smith's mystery woman, suggesting she was his girlfriend, his secret baby mama, his latest acquisition. "Oh God," Debra whispered. Eric pulled out his own phone, his face darkening as he scrolled. "I'll call my PR team. We'll get ahead of this." "Get ahead of what?" "They have photos, Eric. They're saying." She couldn't even finish. Eva's face was in those photos. Her baby's face plastered across gossip sites. Her phone rang. Patricia from the foundation. Then it rang again, a reporter from a local news station. Then again. And again. "Turn it off," Eric said gently. "Turn off your phone. I'll handle this." "You can't handle this. This is..." But Debra couldn't find words for what this was. Violation. Exposure. Everything she'd run from in Texas catching up to her in the worst possible way. The story exploded overnight. By morning, it had been picked up by national outlets. More photos surfaced: Debra entering the foundation, Eric holding Eva in the nursery. How had someone gotten those? The two of them eating Thai food in his office. Intimate moments stolen and commodified. The narratives multiplied. Some painted Eric as a hero helping a woman in need. Others suggested something more sinister: a billionaire taking advantage of a vulnerable single mother. A few noted the racial dynamics, the power imbalance, questioned whether this was charity or exploitation. Debra stopped reading after she found the think piece titled "When Rich White Men Play Savior, the Eric Smith Problem." The foundation became a circus. Reporters camped outside. Staff fielded calls from journalists wanting comments. Patricia looked ready to commit violence on Debra's behalf. And then Richard Chun went on the offensive. The interview appeared in TechCrunch 2 days after the initial story broke. Richard, speaking as an anonymous source close to Smith Ventures, suggested that Eric's involvement with Debra was a calculated PR move designed to rehabilitate his image as a ruthless businessman. That the foundation itself was a vanity project, and Debra was just the latest prop in Eric's redemption narrative. "It's a pattern," the anonymous source said. "He finds people he can save, uses them to make himself look human, then moves on when they've served their purpose." The article included leaked emails, conversations between Eric and his PR team about improving his public image, about making the foundation more visible, about finding authentic stories to share. Nothing explicitly incriminating, but arranged to look damning. Debra read the article in Eric's office, where she'd been summoned along with Patricia and the foundation's entire board. Eric stood by the window, his expression carved from ice. "It's not true," he said flatly. "Richard doctored those emails. Took things out of context, added phrases I never wrote. He's trying to force me out." "Why?" Debra asked, though part of her already knew. "Because the board wants me focused on the merger. Richard's been positioning himself as my replacement for months." This Eric gestured at his phone, at the scandal, at Debra gives them the excuse they need. The board chair, an older woman named Victoria, leaned forward. "Eric, you understand the position this puts us in. The foundation's reputation is at stake. Our donors are asking questions. And Smith Ventures is threatening to pull funding if you don't step back from day-to-day operations here. Let them pull it. I'll fund it myself. That's not sustainable, and you know it. Then I'll make it sustainable." Victoria sighed. "The board is calling an emergency meeting tomorrow. They're going to ask you to choose the foundation or the company. You can't have both, not anymore." After the board filed out, Debra and Eric sat in heavy silence. Eva babbled happily in her carrier, oblivious to the wreckage around them. "This is my fault," Debra said finally. "If I hadn't called you, if I hadn't taken this job." "Don't." Eric's voice was sharp. "Don't do that." Richard would have found another excuse, another angle. He's been waiting for an opportunity. But I gave him one. Debra looked at this man who'd tried to help her and had lost everything in the process. "You should have just left me alone on that plane." "I will never regret not doing that," Eric said quietly. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever I lose, I don't regret meeting you." But Debra could see the cost in his face, the weight of the choice he'd have to make. And she understood then that Eric's protection, however well-intentioned, came with a price they'd both have to pay. The second round of emails arrived like a knife to whatever fragile trust Debra had built. They appeared on every major tech news site simultaneously, a coordinated release designed for maximum damage. More leaked internal communications, these ones far more damning than the first batch. Messages allegedly between Eric and his PR consultant that laid out a strategy in clinical detail. Identify a sympathetic case, preferably with a child, ideally from a marginalized background. Cultivate a relationship. Document it carefully. Use it to soften his image before the merger. And there, in black and white, the single mother from the plane could be perfect. Photogenic kid, compelling story. If we handle this right, we can rehabilitate the ruthless Eric narrative before the shareholders' meeting. Debra's hands shook as she read. The date stamp was from the day after their flight, the day before he'd offered her the job. Patricia found her in the break room, staring at her phone with Eva clutched against her chest. Debra, those are fabricated. You have to know that. Eric would never. How do I know? Debra's voice came out hollow. How do I know what's real and what's just strategic? Because you know him. Because I've seen what he wanted me to see. The words felt like acid in her throat, but once started, she couldn't stop them. I thought I knew Marcus too. Thought he loved me. Then one day I woke up and realized I'd been a thing to him, not a person. Just something he could use. Eric is not Marcus. Isn't he? Debra looked at Patricia, eyes burning. Rich man swoops in to save poor woman. Gets to feel good about himself. Gets his PR win. And all it costs me is what? My dignity. My privacy. My daughter's face on the internet forever? Patricia's expression crumpled with something like pain. I've worked with Eric for 3 years. I've seen him at his worst after Melissa died. He was barely human. This foundation? It wasn't strategy. It was survival. And she reached out, then stopped. You brought him back to life. Whatever those emails say, that part is real. But Debra was already gathering Eva's things, already planning her exit. Because the thing about trauma was that it taught you patterns, and every pattern she'd learned said this. When men started making decisions for you, when they controlled the narrative, when they made you dependent on them, that's when the trap closed. She left through the back entrance while Patricia was on the phone with Eric. Took the bus to a part of Seattle she'd scouted in her first week, the part she'd filed away as Plan B when she'd still believed in always having an exit strategy. The domestic violence shelter sat between a laundromat and a corner store, unmarked and unremarkable by design. The intake counselor was a tired-looking woman named Rose who'd seen it all and had the eyes to prove it. She didn't ask many questions when Debra said she needed somewhere safe, somewhere off the grid. She just nodded and showed them to a small room with 2 cots and a window that overlooked an alley. Phones in the common area, Rose said. We don't allow cells in the room's security protocol. Can't have anyone tracking you here. Debra handed over her phone without argument. Let them wipe it, disable it, whatever they needed to do. She didn't want to be found. Eric tried anyway. The calls came through the shelter's main line 6 in the first hour. Each one Rose deflected with practiced efficiency. Then the foundation's number. Then Patricia's personal cell. Then numbers Debra didn't recognize. Probably Eric cycling through every possible contact. You want to talk to him? Rose asked after the 12th attempt. Debra shook her head, watching Eva play with a donated stuffed rabbit, oblivious to the fact that their entire life had imploded again. Okay, Rose said simply. But honey, I've been doing this work for 15 years. I've seen real predators, real manipulators. And I've seen their victims. Whatever's happening with you and whoever's calling. She paused, weighing her words. Just make sure you're running from the right thing. But Debra knew what she was running from. She was running from the same thing she'd run from in Texas. A man who thought he knew what was best for her, who made decisions without asking, who wrapped control in kindness until you couldn't tell the difference anymore. Across the city, Eric was falling apart in a way he hadn't allowed himself to fall apart since Melissa died. He stood in his corner office at Smith Ventures, the one he rarely used anymore, preferring the foundation's warmth to corporate sterility, and stared at his phone like he could will it to ring. She wouldn't answer his calls. The shelter wouldn't confirm she was there. He'd sent Patricia, but they'd turned her away at the door. Privacy protocol. You need to let this go. Richard stood in the doorway, unable to hide his satisfaction. The board meets in 2 hours. They're going to ask you to resign from the foundation entirely, issue a public statement distancing yourself from the woman, and focus exclusively on the merger. Those emails were fabricated. Prove it. Richard shrugged. Even if you could, the damage is done. The narrative is out there. People believe what they want to believe, and right now they believe you're either a manipulative bastard or a lovesick fool. Either way, you're a liability. Eric turned from the window, and something in his expression made Richard take a step back. Get out. Eric, get out. For 48 hours, Eric considered compliance. He attended meetings, reviewed merger documents, Let his PR team craft statements about focusing on core business objectives. He put on the armor he'd worn for 5 years, the ruthless, calculating executive who made decisions based on logic and profit margins. It felt like dying again. Victoria visited him on the second day, finding him in his office at 2 a.m., still in his suit, surrounded by financial projections that blurred together into meaninglessness. "I knew Melissa," she said without preamble, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Did you know that? We served on a nonprofit board together before you met her. She was extraordinary." Eric said nothing, too exhausted for pleasantries. "She would hate what you've become," Victoria continued. "Not the businessman, she was proud of that, but this hollowed-out version of you that's emerged since she died. And these past few months, working with that young woman and her daughter, that's the first time I've seen anything like the man Melissa loved. The board can go to hell." Victoria's smile was sharp. "I'm stepping down as chair effective immediately, and I'm taking 3 other members with me. We'll trigger a vote of no confidence in the current direction. It'll buy you time." "Why would you do that?" "Because some things matter more than shareholder value. Because I'm 73 years old, and I'd like to believe we can still choose people over profit sometimes." She stood, straightening her jacket. "Don't waste the opportunity, Eric. Find that girl. Fix this. And for God's sake, stop letting Richard Chen run your life." Eric was still processing Victoria's words when his assistant Sarah burst into the office, her face pale. "There's been a development," she said, pulling up a document on her tablet. "Marcus Johnson filed for emergency custody of Eva Nicholson in King County Family Court. He's claiming Debra is homeless, unstable, and living in a domestic violence shelter. He's arguing the child is in danger." Eric's blood went cold. "When?" "Hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Sarah's hands trembled slightly. "Eric, if he wins emergency custody, he can take that baby before Debra even knows what's happening. The shelter won't be able to stop him. They don't have legal standing." Everything crystallized in that moment. The merger, the board, his company, his reputation, all of it meaningless compared to the image of Marcus taking Eva, of Debra losing her daughter. Because she'd run from the wrong threat. Eric had spent 5 years building walls, creating fortresses of money and power that kept loss at bay. But Melissa had taught him something before she died, something he'd forgotten in his grief. Love required risk. It required choosing people even when you might lose them. It required stepping outside the fortress. "Sarah, I need you to do something for me," he said, already moving. "Cancel everything on my calendar for the next week. Everything, including the merger calls. Eric, the board meeting is in 6 hours. Let them meet. Let them vote. Let them do whatever they want." He grabbed his coat, his keys, his phone. "I need you to find me the best family law attorney in Seattle and get them to that courthouse by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Money is no object." "Where are you going?" "To find Debra. To tell her the truth. To prove that I'm not." His voice cracked. "To prove that I choose her. That I choose them. Company, career, all of it. None of it matters if I lose the only real thing I've had in 5 years." Sarah smiled, something almost maternal in her expression. "I'll make the calls. Go." The shelter Rose managed didn't give up resident locations. Eric knew this. He respected it, even as it frustrated him. So he did the only thing he could think of. He sat on the front steps and waited. For hours later, as dawn broke gray and cold over Seattle, Debra emerged to take out the trash. She froze when she saw him. Eric stood slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. He looked wrecked, suit rumpled, tie gone, eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. "I'm not here to convince you to come back," he said. "I'm not here to explain or defend myself. I'm here to tell you that Marcus filed for emergency custody. The hearing is in 3 hours." The color drained from Debra's face. "What?" "He's using your shelter stay as evidence of instability. He's arguing Eva is in danger." Eric took a step closer. "I have lawyers ready. The best in the city. They can fight this, but we need to move now." "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why would you help me after I ran?" "After I believe, because those emails were lies. Because Richard is trying to destroy everything I care about, and I almost let him. Because I spent 5 years dead inside, and you made me feel alive again." Eric's voice was raw. "Because I love you. Both of you. And I know you don't trust that. I know you have every reason not to. But Debra, right now, in this moment, your daughter needs help. And I'm offering it. No strings. No strategy. Just help. Debra searched his face, looking for the lie, for the manipulation, for the trap. But all she saw was a man who'd driven across the city at dawn, who'd sacrificed his company to sit on shelter steps, who was asking for nothing except the chance to protect her child. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The King County Courthouse steps were already crowded when they arrived. Eric's legal team, 3 attorneys in matching gray suits, waited at the entrance, flanked by 2 investigators carrying thick folders. Debra held Eva close, her daughter unusually quiet, as if sensing the tension in the air. Ms. Nicholson, the lead attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer Reeves, extended her hand. "We have 40 minutes before the hearing. Let me walk you through what to expect." They huddled in a small conference room, Jennifer laying out the strategy with clinical precision. Marcus's case rested on 3 pillars: Debra's sudden relocation suggesting flight risk, her shelter stay indicating instability, and his recent reformation. He'd apparently gotten a job, an apartment, completed an online parenting course. "It's all performance," Jennifer said. "But family court judges err on the side of biological parents, especially fathers who claim they've been denied access. We need to dismantle his credibility completely." "Can you do that?" Debra asked, her voice small. Jennifer smiled like a predator. "Watch me." Eric stayed silent through most of the briefing, but Debra felt his presence beside her like an anchor. He'd positioned himself close enough that their shoulders almost touched, not crowding her, but making it clear he wasn't going anywhere. 20 minutes before the hearing, Debra excused herself to change Eva's diaper. The bathroom was on the ground floor, down a hallway that opened to a side entrance. She was washing her hands when she heard his voice. "There's my girl." Marcus stood in the bathroom doorway, blocking the exit. He looked different, cleaned up, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt that almost made him look responsible. Almost. But his eyes were the same, calculating, mean, entitled. "You can't be here," Debra said, moving to shield Eva. "The restraining order gets lifted today when the judge sees what kind of mother you really are." He stepped into the bathroom, letting the door close behind him. Running away in the night, hiding in shelters, shacking up with rich men for money. What kind of example is that for our daughter? "She's not your daughter. DNA says different. I got tested, got the results. 50% mine." His smile was cruel. "Judge is gonna love that. Especially when I explain how you kept her from me, how you're so unstable you're living in a homeless shelter." "I left that shelter. I have housing paid for by your sugar daddy." Marcus laughed. "That's even better. Shows you'll do anything for money. Maybe the judge needs to know about that too." He moved toward Eva, hands reaching, and something primal snapped in Debra. She'd spent months running, hiding, trying to avoid confrontation. But this was her daughter, her child, and she was done running. "Don't touch her." Her voice came out steady, strong. "Don't you dare touch her. She's my daughter. You have no rights here. No claim. No power." Debra stood taller, holding Eva with one arm and pulling out her phone with the other. "And if you take one more step, I'm screaming until every person in this courthouse comes running." Marcus's expression shifted from confident to uncertain. This wasn't the scared woman he'd left bruises on in Texas. This was someone who'd found her spine. "Debra?" Eric's voice carried down the hallway, sharp with concern. "Debra," where Marcus's mask cracked. "You think he's going to save you? Men like that don't stay with women like you. You're a project, a charity case. Once he's bored, I'll still be fine." Debra met Marcus's eyes without flinching. "Because I don't need him. I want him. There's a difference. Something you never understood." Eric appeared in the doorway with 2 courthouse security guards. His expression when he saw Marcus went from worried to lethal in half a second. "Officers, this man is violating a restraining order and threatening a witness in an ongoing custody case." The guards moved fast. Marcus tried to protest, tried to play the victim. "I just wanted to see my daughter. I wasn't threatening anyone," but Eric's investigators were already there with documentation, photos, the restraining order, everything. "You're under arrest," one guard said, pulling out handcuffs. "You have the right to remain." Marcus's face contorted with rage. "This isn't over, Deb. I'll get her. I'll take her from you if it's the last thing I do." The guards hauled him away, his threats echoing down the corridor. Debra sagged against the wall, adrenaline draining, leaving her shaking. Eva started to cry, picking up on her mother's distress. Eric reached for them, then stopped, his hands hovering uncertainly. "Can I?" Debra stepped into his arms. letting him hold both her and Eva while the terror subsided. He was solid, steady, real. And for the first time, accepting his support didn't feel like weakness. It felt like choice. The custody hearing lasted 17 minutes. Jennifer presented evidence methodically. Marcus's arrest record, documentation of past abuse, proof he'd lied about his employment history, witness statements from Debra's neighbors in Texas about his behavior. The investigators had been thorough. They'd even found the online parenting course Marcus claimed to have completed and proved he'd paid someone else to take it for him. Marcus's attorney tried to salvage the case, arguing about biological rights and redemption, but the judge, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and no patience for nonsense, shut it down. Mr. Johnson, you have no legal standing. You're not on the birth certificate. You've demonstrated a pattern of harassment and abuse, and as of this morning, you're facing criminal charges for violating a restraining order. She looked at him over her glasses. This petition is denied. Furthermore, I'm issuing a permanent restraining order effective immediately. Any future attempts to contact Ms. Nicholson or her daughter will result in criminal prosecution. The gavel came down with a finality that made Debra's knees weak. Outside the courthouse, Jennifer shook Debra's hand with genuine warmth. You did well in there. Strong testimony. I barely said anything. Exactly. You let the evidence speak. That takes courage. Jennifer glanced at Eric, then back at Debra. For what it's worth, I've worked with Eric Smith for 3 years on various foundation cases. He's one of the good ones. Stubborn as hell, but good. After the lawyers left, Debra and Eric stood on the courthouse steps in the watery Seattle sunlight, Eva dozing in her carrier, exhausted from the morning's drama. Thank you, Debra said quietly. For the lawyers, the investigators, all of it. I'll pay you back somehow. I don't want payment. Eric turned to face her. I want to talk. Really talk. Not about Marcus or the case or the foundation. About us. Is there an US? I don't know. That's what I want to talk about. He gestured to a small coffee shop across the street. Please. They found a quiet corner booth. Eric ordered coffee for himself, tea for Debra, hot chocolate for Eva. Even though she was too young to drink it, she can play with the whipped cream, he said, and Debra's heart did something complicated in her chest. I need to tell you something, Eric began, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup like it could anchor him. After Melissa died, I convinced myself that grief was weakness, that feeling anything made you vulnerable, and vulnerability meant loss. So I built walls. Big ones. Turned myself into something cold and efficient and profitable. I know the feeling, Debra said softly. The board wanted that version of me. Richard especially. He saw emotions as liabilities, relationships as distractions. And for 5 years, I agreed with him. Eric looked up, meeting her eyes. Then I met you. And Eva. And I started feeling things again: hope, fear, joy, terror. All the messy, complicated things that make you human. The board called an emergency meeting, Debra said. It wasn't a question. They voted to remove me as CEO of Smith Ventures. Effective. Immediately. Eric said it without inflection, like reciting weather information. Richard's in charge now. The merger will probably go through. Everyone will make a lot of money. And I'll be remembered as the executive who lost his edge. Debra felt her stomach drop. Eric, I'm so sorry. Your company was killing me. He said it simply, like stating fact. Slowly, methodically killing everything that made me who I used to be. Who Melissa loved. Who I want to be for you and Eva. He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. I'm not going to lie and say it doesn't hurt. I built that company from nothing. But I also can't lie and say I'm sorry I made the choice I made. What choice? You. I chose you. Eric's voice was steady. When Richard leaked those emails, when the board demanded I cut ties, when every logical business decision said to walk away, I chose you instead. I choose you now. I'll keep choosing you for as long as you'll let me. Debra felt tears burning behind her eyes. Those emails were fabricated. My legal team proved it. Richard took real emails about PR strategy and spliced in phrases I never wrote. He's been trying to undermine me for months. Eric finally closed the distance, his hand covering hers. But I understand why you believe them. Given your history, given what Marcus did, it makes sense that you'd see patterns where there weren't any. I'm sorry I ran. Don't be. You did what you needed to survive. That's not something to apologize for. He squeezed her hand gently. But Debra, I need you to understand something. I'm not perfect. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to be overprotective sometimes. I'm going to try to solve problems with money when what you need is just someone to listen. I've spent 5 years being a CEO, and I'm still learning how to just be human again. I'm not perfect either, Debra whispered. I'm going to doubt you sometimes. I'm going to see threats where there aren't any. I've spent so long expecting betrayal that trust doesn't come easy. So we'll figure it out together. Eric's smile was tentative, hopeful. We'll make mistakes and apologize and try again. We'll communicate instead of assuming. We'll build something real instead of running from something broken. Eva chose that moment to grab a handful of whipped cream and smear it across her face, giggling at the sensation. They both laughed, the tension breaking like clouds after a storm. Can I ask you something? Debra said, watching Eric wipe Eva's face with a gentleness that never failed to surprise her. When you named the foundation after your daughter, what was her name? Your daughter? Eric's hand stilled. Eva. We were going to name her Eva. His voice was thick with emotion. Melissa chose it. It means life. She thought it was perfect. Debra felt everything click into place, the recognition on that plane, the immediate connection, the way Eric had looked at her daughter like seeing a ghost and a miracle simultaneously. That's why you helped us. That first day on the plane. That's why I noticed you, Eric corrected gently. I helped because you needed help. I kept helping because somewhere along the way, you both became the most important people in my world. He looked at Eva, then at Debra. I'm not trying to replace what I lost. I know I can't do that. But I would like to build something new. If you'll let me. 3 months later, Debra stood in the doorway of their home, not a mansion, not a penthouse, just a modest house in a neighborhood with good schools and a park 2 blocks away, and watched Eric hold Eva's hands as she took her first wobbling steps across the living room floor. Come on, sweetheart, Eric encouraged, his whole face alight with joy. You can do it. Come to me. Eva took 1 step, 2, 3, then tumbled forward into Eric's waiting arms. Her delighted laughter filled the space, and Eric looked up at Debra with an expression of such pure happiness that it made her chest ache. The foundation had been restructured, with Eric as executive director instead of just a figurehead donor. He worked from home 2 days a week, spent the others at the office, maintained the balance he'd never bothered with before. The company he'd built was thriving under Richard's leadership, and Eric had finally made peace with the fact that letting go had been the right choice. Debra had enrolled at University of Washington, studying social work with a minor in nonprofit management. Patricia had been insufferably smug about it. I knew you'd be perfect for this field, and had already started planning how to bring Debra onto the foundation staff full-time after graduation. The media storm had eventually died down, replaced by newer scandals and fresher gossip. Marcus was serving 6 months for violating the restraining order, and his parental rights had been permanently terminated. Some nights Debra still woke up afraid, still reached for Eva to make sure she was real and safe. But those nights were fewer now, further between. Eric walked over, Eva babbling happily in his arms, and wrapped his free arm around Debra's waist. She leaned into him, letting herself relax into the embrace, still marveling at how natural it had become. What are you thinking? He asked softly. Debra looked at Eva, at Eric, at the life they'd built from broken pieces and unexpected chances. I'm thinking about that plane ride. How terrified I was. How sure I was that I had to do everything alone. And now? Now I'm grateful I sat next to a billionaire with a good heart and terrible timing. She smiled up at him. Now I'm grateful I learned that accepting help isn't weakness. That trust, real trust, is something you build slowly, day by day. Eric kissed her forehead. I'm grateful you gave me a second chance. And a third. And however many it took to prove I wasn't going anywhere. Eva reached for Debra, wanting her mother, and they stood there in the doorway of their imperfect, beautiful life, a family forged not by blood or obligation, but by choice. By the daily decision to show up, to be honest, to love each other through the fear and the doubt and the healing. Outside, the Seattle rain had finally stopped, and weak sunlight broke through the clouds. Inside, Eva took another wobbly step, then another, learning to walk in a home where she was safe, wanted, and unconditionally loved. Sometimes, Debra thought, the most unexpected connections become the strongest foundations. Sometimes the person sitting next to you on a plane changes everything. Sometimes having the courage to accept help is the bravest thing you can do. And sometimes, when you've spent your whole life running, the greatest act of courage is simply standing still and letting yourself be loved. Eva laughed, and Eric caught her as she stumbled, and Debra felt something she hadn't felt in years settle deep in her bones. Peace. Not perfection, but peace. Not a fairy tale ending, but a real beginning. And that, she decided, was more than enough. It was everything. To all my amazing viewers, thank you. Every time you watch, like, and share my videos, you keep the echoes of love alive. Your support, your comments, and your time mean more than you know. This channel exists because of you. I appreciate you deeply.